John Gretton Jocko Woollink Jr. is a former US Navy SEALs commander who earned Bronze and Silver Stars for serving his country in Iraq and other places. Many millions now know him as an author, an entrepreneur, and a doyen of discipline. Well, brace yourselves, because Jock Woollink today is going uncensored. I've talked to many great sportsmen, many of whom have got extraordinarily confident personas. And I've always asked them, is that really what you're like? Or do you go through the same kind of fears and concerns and nerves as everybody else? You just don't show us. And almost invariably, they say, yeah, we feel it, we just don't show it. They have a veneer which allows them not to show that they're nervous or fearful, be it footballers or cricketers or swimmers, whatever it may be, anyone involved in hard elite level competition. What about you? I mean, when you were a Navy SEAL, you're one of the most highly trained people in the world in terms of military. Did you experience real fear, nerves, before you went into battle?
Yeah, so for me, there's really two components for that. And the number one question that you asked, did I feel fear and nervousness? The answer is absolutely. When you're going out on an operation, I would feel almost sick to my stomach with fear that one of my guys was going to get wounded or killed during an operation. That is a feeling that is very disturbing, and it's very hard to deal with. Now, that being said, and I talked about this on my podcast a while ago, I also had a little bit of a switch. And for me, for doing operations, it was actually the moment when we would start up our vehicles, or the moment when I would put down my night vision goggles. And then I would sort of flip a switch in my head where I would become very confident in what we had done to prepare for this operation and the confidence in the execution of the operation. I'd known, we had planned, we'd prepared, we'd trained. I knew that we had done everything that we could to be ready to conduct this operation. I also knew that there were a couple things that we can't control. There are certain parts of life, there are certain things in the world that we have no control over. And I would just cast those out of my brain. I wouldn't worry about them anymore. I would focus on the things that I could control, focus on the training and the preparation that we had done, and I would become very confident once we started to go out and execute that operation. And I feel that many sports people feel the same way. Listen, if you're arrogant and you think, oh, nothing will ever happen, we're more than prepared to do this, well, then you might cut corners. Then you might not train as hard. Then you might not prepare as well. So you have to be humble when you're preparing for an operation. But when you actually go to execute an operation, you have to be confident and believe that you have prepared and planned and you're ready to execute this thing. Otherwise, it's going to be nerve-wracking, and I don't even know how you would deal with that.
And when you look at the situation with Israel and their war with Hamas, and in particular, the collateral damage of so many civilians, particularly children, getting killed in the process of trying to eliminate Hamas, what do you feel about that? From a moral perspective, as a former SEAL, do you think it's a fair fight, what's happening there?
Do I think it's a fair fight that's happening in Gaza at this time? Yeah. I saw a video clip the other day, Pierce, of some Israeli soldiers that were moving down the street in Gaza. And as I was watching them move down the street, remember that feeling I told you get in your gut, of that gut-wrenching, horrible feeling when someone's going to get wounded or killed? Yeah. As I was watching these Israeli soldiers move down the street, I got that feeling. And I recognized that what these Israeli soldiers are feeling is that. They're going into Gaza, they're trying to get it cleared out. And what's interesting about Israel is the government officials, the leaders of Israel, they've had that feeling as well. I know what that feeling is, but the leaders of Israel know what that feeling is as well. And so they don't want to put their troops into that situation. It's not worth it to them. And so what are they doing? They're being very heavy-handed with airstrikes. And there's a ton of collateral damage. And I think their feeling is, hey, we are willing to do some collateral damage to protect our people. And I think that's why you're getting this amount of collateral damage. And I think that once Israel gets to a point where they feel like Hamas has been significantly neutralized, I think they're going to put the brakes on, and I think they're going to do their best to try and bring back some level of humanity to Gaza. Will it be too late at that point? I'm not sure. This is the horrible thing about war, is the only thing that explains what will happen at the end of a war is what happens at the end of a war. The people of Gaza, how are they going to react? How are they going to settle in if all of a sudden Israel starts trying to help them rebuild? Have they been battered to a point where they won't ever accept that type of situation? Or have they been battered to a point where they say, you know what, we've had enough. We don't want Hamas here. We want to live normal lives. Let's cooperate. How is that going to end up, Pierce? I do not know.
It's a mess, isn't it? I mean, in terms of that whole region, this is a real mess.
Yeah, it's very unpredictable. It's very unpredictable, and especially for us sitting on the outside, as the whole world sitting on the outside, trying to look at it and trying to understand the propaganda from both sides, trying to decipher what all that means is very difficult. And as you said, it's a mess.
War is about killing at its heart. That's what a war is. You, as a Navy SEAL for 20 years or so, you will have presumably killed a lot of people and seen many of your colleagues killed. How do you deal with death, both deaths of people around you, friends, colleagues, and having to take other people's lives in combat, in war?
Well, you said it, Pierce, and I think a lot of times people forget this fact that what war is death. War is killing, and it is being killed. And it's something that I think sometimes we go into wars thinking that we're going to somehow get through a war without killing people, and we're going to get through a war without having our own forces killed. So that is one of the most premier things we need to think about if we're going to engage in a conflict around the world. You've got to go into that with the will to go out there and kill the enemy. You also have to recognize the fact that going into a combat situation, there is a high probability, if not an absolute certainty, that civilians are going to be killed as well. And you've got to have that understanding that there's nothing that you can do that's going to prevent your own forces from being killed. That's what war is. So war is death, and when you're in war, you're going to deal with death. Unfortunately, I did lose my own guys. I lost many friends over the 2 decades of war that we fought, and it is a terrible thing to have to deal with. I did start to recognize a pattern when it came to dealing with death, and that is the initial shockwave of, oh, I've lost one of my friends, one of my brothers, and it's a horrible, gut-wrenching feeling, and it's really waves of emotions that are going to hit you that are going to be very difficult to control, which is not something you're used to as a grown adult, having emotions hit you that you're not able to control. And sometimes that can be very scary for people, because all of a sudden, for the first time in many years, they're in scenarios where they're getting emotional and they can't control their emotions. Now, what I learned over time was those emotions will eventually start to dissipate, and the waves of emotion will become less frequent, and they will also become less powerful over time. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think sometimes people feel, oh, I don't feel as emotional as I used to. Am I a bad person? No, you're not a bad person. You're just learning to get through the loss of one of your friends. So I unfortunately experienced this many times, these waves of emotion that hit when you first lose someone in combat, and then feeling those waves dissipate over time. And I think that's actually what's supposed to happen. And I think when people are struggling with loss, which everyone's going to experience loss in their lives. I mean, that's what's going to happen. If you're going to lose people that you love, family, friends, it's going to happen. And what you have to recognize is that those terrible emotions that you feel at first, they're going to dissipate over time, and that's okay. And you also have to recognize that it's not a good idea to dwell in the past, to constantly think about this loss that you've suffered. Instead, you have to remember the people that you've lost, but you have to move forward. You have to move forward with your life. I can guarantee you right now, the friends and brothers that I lost, the absolute last thing that they would want me to do would be to sit around for the rest of my life and mourn for their loss. In fact, the absolute opposite is true. What they would want me to do would be to go out and live the best possible life I can, and that's what I try and do.